Today we're at the National Palace Museum of Korea. The museum we're looking at, established back in 1908, is home to over 40,000 royal treasures and artifacts from the Joseon Dynasty and the Korean Empire. Today we'll be focusing on the historical pieces from the Korean Empire, which ruled the peninsula from 1897 to 1910, up until the Empire of Japan colonized the entire state. The throne we just saw is called the Hwangchil Oja and was seated by the Emperor of the Korean Empire. Next is the royal seal for the bestowal of an honorific title on King Gojong from 1892, which is also a UNESCO Memory of the World. Let's move on. What you're seeing now are some valuable documents preserved from the Korean Empire. This includes appointment documents of government officials, as well as a compendium of treaties Joseon established with other nations. Also in our view are records of the Korean mission in the US, printing plates for money production, and various seals used by officials of the Korean Empire. The document on the far left side is the Royal Protocol, or Uige, which records the process of creating portraits of Emperor Gojong and Sunjong. The actual portrait of Emperor Gojong is presented on the wall, and below are documents and medals celebrating his 40th anniversary of power. Next up, you'll be able to see the commemorative medal and postcard celebrating the enthronement of the Korean Empire's second emperor, Sunjong. You're also seeing photos of Emperor Sunjong's royal tour around the country in 1909, the photograph album of Emperor Gojong's state funeral in 1919, and the album of Emperor Sunjong's state funeral in 1926. On the far left side is the Imperial Protocol, also a UNESCO Memory of the World, that records the legitimate process of Emperor Gojong's enthronement and the establishment of the Korean Empire. Moreover, we can see another UNESCO Memory of the World illustrating the state funeral of Empress Myeongsong, who was violently killed by the Japanese in 1895. Emperor Gojong honored his 4 lineal ancestors as emperors, and the seals representing this are in front of us. The book on the right side documents the installation of Gojong's sons as King Uiwang and Yeongwang, emphasizing Korea's status as a standing empire. Emperor Gojong actively modernized the Korean government office structures after he declared the Korean Empire, and documents recording ministry regulations and member information are as seen in front of you. During the Joseon Dynasty, Korea was a kingdom and royal objects were colored in red. After the declaration of the Korean Empire, however, the imperial objects were colored in gold in order to symbolize the transition from a kingdom to an empire. The chair in front of us was used to enshrine a spirit tablet during rituals held at Hwanggudan and was decorated with dragons symbolizing the authority and sovereignty of the Korean Empire. On the right side is the wooden folding screen that was placed behind the chair during the rituals. We are now seeing how the palace of the Korean Empire looked during the modern period. Western furniture, daily goods, and electricity were brought in. At the same time, you can see a Korean traditional folding screen at the back, representing the simultaneous coexistence of Korean and Western culture. The table was made of marble, and the consistent golden color once again represents the authority of the Korean Empire and emperor. In front of us, we have some more extremely detailed and historically valuable documents from the empire. This includes imperial documentations of the Gyeongung Palace reconstruction, the Chunghajeon Hall reconstruction, and the Deoksugung Palace structure map. The plaque on the wall was presented at the Dondokjeon Hall, where Emperor Gojong received foreign envoys and held banquets. The blue document on the right is a map illustrating the water pipes installed in the Cheongdeokgung Palace. Here we have a sketch of a Western curtain decoration intended to be hung in the Cheongdeokgung Palace, and electric light bulbs that were implemented in 1887. Up next is a demonstration of the lifestyle and living quarter of the Korean Empire's imperial family. As you can see, the imperial living quarter was substantially affected by Western culture, including marble desks. Here is a wooden drop-leaf table, and in the background is a folding screen drawn by a well-known artist of the Joseon dynasty called Yang Gi-hun. On the right side of the screen is a French Baroque-style table. Here we have some side tables. The imperial family used modernized kitchens and bathrooms as well. For reference, there are numerous records stating that the emperor utilized Western furniture and utensils. In front of us are the symbols of the Korean Empire, including the yin-yang taeguk, plum flower, hibiscus syriacus, and falcon. Such symbols were necessary as the empire created efforts to emphasize its sovereignty and authority as a modern state. Now don't confuse yourself because we're still exploring artifacts from the Korean Empire, not those from Europe. Here we can see the modern banquet culture and imperial utensils used in the Korean Empire. Banquets held with foreign envoys usually serve both Western and Korean cuisine. Now let's take a brief look at the crafts and goods used in the Korean Empire. You are looking at silver kettles, wooden boxes, burners, and bottles. And these are interesting German bathroom accessories used by the imperial family and produced by Villeroy and Boch. Finally, these are European-styled iron baking molds used to prepare jelly, cake, and waffles. We can infer that the imperial family enjoys certain Western desserts from this. Western uniforms of the imperial family, government officials, and soldiers were also adopted in the Korean Empire. At the same time, however, the empire preserved the utilization of traditional attire during traditional events. Plums, a symbol of the Korean Empire, can be easily found in the Western uniforms in front of us. The photo we're seeing now includes Prince Imperial Young, Emperor Sunjong, Emperor Gojong, Empress Sunjong-hyo, and Princess Tokye. Prince Imperial Young was the final crowned prince of Korea and was married to a Japanese princess named Masako. You can see a Korean brush stand used in the 20th century and a painting drawn by Masako, the wife of Prince Imperial Young. On the left side are postcards reflecting Prince Imperial Young in a Western uniform. You can also see the Japanese imperial family document, which includes the Korean imperial family. This was Japan's intention to degrade the Korean imperial family as a royal or noble family instead. Finally, we can see the royal vehicles used by Emperor Sunjong and Empress Sunjong-hyo, which are inferred to be 1918 models of the General Motors Cadillac limousine. Let's wrap up our tour with this for today. Although the Korean Empire was eventually colonized by the Empire of Japan, we were able to see Korea's efforts to modernize and strengthen its sovereignty by analyzing its artifacts. I hope this tour provided some historical information that would be difficult to find otherwise. Thank you, and I'll see you again.